Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on building a nonprofit data science team. We're really excited to hopefully share with you some valuable lessons from our experience working on this together. So with that, we'll get right into it and start off with introductions. My name is Ben Kirshner. I'm an applied data science lead at Civis Analytics, where I work with nonprofits leveraging data to help them understand and grow donor and supporter base. This ranges from building ETL and reporting pipelines to predictive modeling to research. And I've been at Civis for about 3.5 years. And now I'll pass it off to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate McKenney. I'm the Insights and Data Strategy Director at NRDC. My role is really focused on building data capacities and leading the ways that we use data to sort of inform our strategies around advocacy and fundraising and political power building. Before moving into this role, I spent many, many years building digital technology capacities at lots of different nonprofit and advocacy orgs. And my orientation to data science began first by studying salamanders as a conservation biology person in Western Massachusetts. So I'm excited to sort of share our story and how we've been partnering with Civis.
Thanks, Kate. So what we hope to accomplish with you all in this session is to convey a basic understanding of considerations for starting data science capacity at a nonprofit. Hopefully have you be able to recognize what's needed, not just from a data science team or a data team writ large, but the entire organization to enable data science success, as well as being able to identify and address common challenges. So with that, I will start us off by going over some of the basics of what data science teams are, what they do, and considerations for getting started. And then Kate will bring us home sharing NRDC's really fascinating story in this regard. So to start, we want to cover some of the basics of what is data science, how can a nonprofit use data science? There are 3 key elements of data science that I think are worth highlighting. The first is the overall goal of data science, which is to solve organizational problems through the discovery of data insights and the development of data products. That is really the what of data science, but there are 2 important hows as well. And that is that data science is an end-to-end process that doesn't just involve the analysis, but also involves capturing data, processing data, and crucially, communicating with data. Data science is also a multidisciplinary field that, in order to be successful, requires collaboration of people with different skills and different backgrounds. I'll next dive into a little bit more about each of these 3 points. So what are the organizational problems that you might be trying to solve with data science, especially in the context of a nonprofit organization? The way I like to think about this is data science can really help answer 2 questions, or 3 questions really, but who is your universe? Who should you be talking to? How should you be talking to or engaging with those people? So understanding what matters to the people you care about. What are my opportunities potentially to engage with new audiences or re-engage with existing audiences? What creatives might be most persuasive in those efforts? And once you know who to talk to and how to talk to, another area that data science can help nonprofits is in optimizing investments based on that knowledge. So what is the right amount of spend to convert a certain audience? To make this a little bit more concrete, I want to share 4 quick examples of ways that nonprofits have used data science. The first is in working with Everytown. And one of the key ways that data science can help a nonprofit, and we'll talk a lot more about this in depth shortly, is creating a single source of truth. And that single source of truth oftentimes means resolving identities of individuals across multiple source systems. So you may have an email marketing system and you may have a CRM and need to link those to better understand individuals across those systems. That problem only grows more complex with the more source systems that you have. But there's a technological solution here, and that is using matching algorithms to identify records in those different operational systems that represent the same person. So maybe person A in one system matches to person B in another, matches to person C in another. And you start to build out a complete understanding of who you're engaging with and how. And this has both strategic consequences as well as practical. So on the practical side, in this case, every town was able to stop expensive outreach to outdated or duplicative records. But we'll also see shortly through NRDC's work that this can really lay a strong foundation for developing deep understanding of who your universe is, how they engage with you, how they like to engage with you, and ways to better engage them. Another way nonprofits can use data science is identifying, like I said earlier, who to talk to. This might be new audiences to talk to. This might be identifying subsets of your existing audience to talk to for a specific purpose. But oftentimes, a tool that we use in this regard is predictive modeling, identifying people who either are most likely to hold a certain belief, most likely to take a certain action, or in the case of lyric opera, most likely to buy tickets to a performance. And in this case, we use predictive modeling to identify people that looked like their current universe, but were not actually in their current universe, with the idea that those individuals are perhaps more likely to buy tickets. And sure enough, we did see that those individuals were 3.7 times more likely to buy tickets. So data science and predictive modeling can help identify specific audiences for you to talk to. A third use case, I said, I was talking about who to talk to, but also how to talk to individuals. And where data science can be really helpful for nonprofits is identifying the most persuasive message to get your supporters, your donors, your members to take the actions that you want them to, whether that's donate, sign a petition, attend an event. And identifying what is the most persuasive message is not always straightforward and intuitive, and unfortunately not something you can rely on just a survey to suss out. For instance, you might run a survey trying to identify why individuals are hesitant to get a COVID-19 vaccine, and that survey might return overwhelmingly concerns about safety. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a message that emphasizes vaccine safety would be the most effective message. And so in this case, we employ randomized control trials. You can think of these actually similar to the vaccine trials that have been going on for the past year to really isolate the effects of each message on individuals and figure out which messages are most persuasive. In this case, USA for UNHCR was wanting to learn what messages would encourage donations for cash assistance. And by using these methods, we're able to identify which message worked best for each audience and have that be an input to future marketing and comms decisions. Randomized control trials, though, aren't just great for identifying what are the best messages. They're also great for sussing out impact of a program. And this is another area where data science can help nonprofits. So in this case, an organization called MRelief, which helps people sign up for SNAP benefits, wanted to prove its impact in its methods of sign up to help secure investment from funders. That's oftentimes a crucial part of quantifying impact. And by using and designing experiments, we were able to show that indeed the new approach did increase signups by 18%. My hope is that some of these concrete examples lay the groundwork for understanding how nonprofits can use data science. But solving those problems with data is only one part of the equation when we talk about data science. That second bullet, if you recall, is that data science is an end-to-end process. And this is why it's really key. This is really key to understand when we talk about building data science capacity. Data science is more than algorithm development or model building, but really building data science capacity means getting value out of your data from beginning to end. So that involves from the outset strategic planning, data capture, data manipulation, the analysis part, which is often the most talked about, reporting, and then ultimately automation to increase efficiency. So this is just a sample workflow of what that might be from end to end. It could be about understanding different engagement paths between audiences that inbounded from separate events or separate campaigns. Or perhaps if you are a disaster relief organization, you might want to understand differences in giving patterns between blue sky donors and emergency donors. But regardless of the case, all of these analyses and all of these projects start with identifying what it is you're trying to learn, understanding what data you need. Do you have that data? Do you need to collect that data? Where does that data sit? Do we need to transform that data? You then get to the analysis part, and after analysis is crucially as well, communicating the results with data. And most data scientists will tell you that it's all these tasks around that black analysis box that require the bulk of attention as well as time. The last thing to understand about data science is that it is a multidisciplinary field, and achieving that end-to-end process that I was just talking about involves coordinating a lot of different functions. Part of what can be tricky about this is there is a high degree of overlap between these functions and job roles. And depending on your organization, these functions can actually sit with different roles. We'll get into just a bit how to potentially structure teams, but regardless of how you structure teams, bringing together these functions is key to building successful analytics capacity. Because of that, I want to spend a brief moment on each one of those, going over what these roles' functions are and what skills you might want to look at for these roles if you are considering expanding these roles in your organization. So to start with is the data engineer. For the data engineer, the easiest thing to think about is someone that's moving data between different systems or different sources. This person is developing pipelines and architectures to do just that. This person is often working with raw data from systems, and as such has skills pertaining to database systems, SQL and other ETL tools, and competencies with data APIs. Lots of times data engineers have a software background that they bring to this work. A data scientist, on the other hand, is someone that's doing a lot of data cleaning, preparing the data for analysis, and then ultimately, once that data is clean, and again, that is really the bulk of the work, employing perhaps machine learning methods or statistical analysis, designing and conducting experiments, trying to answer those questions that you have about your organization. The skills that lead into that are predictive modeling, statistical analysis or statistical computing, crucially, storytelling and visualization, as well as potentially a mathematical background. And so data scientists will often come from a statistical background, but that's not necessarily a requirement by any means. We also have a BI specialist, maybe a data analyst, maybe an insights analyst, whose function is really to collect data and perform analyses to answer those organizational questions as well. Sometimes working with cleaner data sets, sometimes also cleaning data. This person might be preparing reports for stakeholders, and as such has skills again pertaining to database systems, perhaps spreadsheet competencies, as well as really crucially, again, visualization and BI tools. There's also glue that ties all of this together. And so this might be a system administrator, a database administrator, an IT manager. This person is ensuring that the source systems that are collecting and generating data, that could be your CRM, that could be an email marketing platform, are functioning properly and securely and implementing enhancements when needed. This person oftentimes has project management skills, in-depth knowledge of systems that fall under an area of responsibility, focusing on methods for backup and recovery and security. And lastly, there's the person that is perhaps directing all of this. This could be an insights manager, an analytics manager, a data director. This person is setting the strategic priorities for the analyses, sharing results, liaising with the broader organization as well. And as such, this person probably has an understanding of some of the data concepts, but is also adept in leadership and communication and project management. Why I wanted to go over those is just so you have a sense of who are these individuals that comprise data teams. And crucially, there is some blend between some of these roles, but generally a successful data team will have someone focusing on all of these functions. Oftentimes, actually, what we found in working with nonprofits is that You can't just hire a data science and then have a data scientist and then have a data science capacity. And sometimes even starting with data engineering and data and analysts is more effective. So with that, I do want to shift gears now to talking about actually getting started and share some considerations for developing a data science function in your organization. As you think about becoming a data-driven organization, there are 5 key things to keep in mind that support data-driven organizations. The first, crucially, and we'll spend a lot of time on this in just a second, is data. In order to be data-driven, you need to be building, maintaining, and utilizing great and helpful data sets. But data is not the only part of the equation. Another crucial part is people and process. You need to be able to empower the right people and introduce and sustain rigorous processes to support those analyses. Oftentimes, supporting those analyses requires technology. The technology should hopefully let the work happen and not hinder the people and processes or the data that you have. Then there's the element of bringing it to the larger organization. If data, people, and processes and technology are kind of core to a data team, cultures where it's really important to have a culture that appreciates, uses, and prioritizes data, not just with your data team, but the larger organization. And finally, a lot of times conversations around data science focus on cutting edge or really fancy scientific methods. The goal is to get there, but that is kind of the last piece of the puzzle, is embracing the science and the methods that can help the organization anticipate change and adapt to it. But like I said, it all starts with data. And I do fundamentally believe that a great data set with simple methods is going to be much more helpful to your organization than a mediocre or messy data set with complex methods. And that is why most data scientists will tell you data cleaning is a huge part of the job. But what this really gets at is the difference between having data versus having usable data or useful data. So what is useful data? Useful data is data that is reliably available, it's material to decision making, it's accessible, it's clean, it's regularly updated, and it connects data across different systems. Also key to having useful data is having a shared understanding of definitions across an organization. So an example of this might be, how do we define when a sustainer lapses? Is it if they miss their next scheduled gift? Is it if we don't hear from them in 3 months? In order to have useful analyses, you need to have a common starting point, and that is a shared understanding of definitions. So you might be thinking, is my data useful? How do I know? Well, here are some questions to consider as you start to assess your own data. At the very beginning, what data sets do we have? What systems are they generated in? And are they connected? Do we have a way of looking at them together? The second question is not necessarily the easiest to answer, but it will tell you a lot about your data. And that is, can our data answer the questions we have about our organization or our members or our supporters? And if the answer is no, perhaps then you might ask yourself, do we need to improve our existing data to answer those questions? Or do we need to consider collecting additional data? These questions can help guide you as you start to think about whether or not your data is what we would call useful data. Having useful data is oftentimes a challenge that we see in nonprofits, and that is oftentimes due to data silos. This graphic, I hope, is not too overwhelming, but the data landscape is ever growing and becoming more complex. And that oftentimes means more siloed data. When we work with nonprofits, we often see organizations employing multiple source systems. I've mentioned CRMs, I've mentioned email marketing platforms. There's SMS systems, event, volunteer coordinating, offline activism, program databases, etc. And because of that, we see silos across systems, across teams, across functions, across offices. So a really good place to start is to think about breaking down those silos. Analytics capacity is really built on a shared source of truth. It's about making assumptions about your organization explicit, confirming or disproving those assumptions, and iterating. And crucially, a shared source of truth is fostering those conversations. So some potential starting points to break down silos and develop that shared source of truth depend on where your organization is now. But examples might be developing a common data layer that can standardize metrics across teams, chapters, even organizations, so that you're able to have an apples to apples conversation or comparison as opposed to apples to oranges. It might mean unifying data from existing source systems to better understand holistic engagement. It might mean building systems for further data collection or enhancing existing data with third-party data assets or survey research to answer the question, really, who are we engaging with? Or it might mean cataloging and surfacing your existing data for broader consumption or increased collaboration. And like I said, this could look very different for various organizations. A small organization might be looking to learn more about who is on their list. And in that case, the answer to building a single source of truth might be identifying third-party data to help supplement their existing data. A slightly larger organization might want to determine what are the best messages across a series of campaigns and employ survey research or the randomized control trials that we were talking about to build that single source of truth and answer that question. Or a larger organization might want to start looking at supporter journeys, cross-channel engagement, and optimizing pathways with which their supporters engage. And then building that shared source of truth might mean investing in data infrastructure. It can look different for different organizations, but a crucial starting place is this foundational element of building that shared source of truth. Everything builds from there. So the first component of being a data-driven organization is data. Next is that people and technology are also a key part of the equation. So the impact of a data team comes when they are able to create and deploy solutions that are consumable and usable by others in the organization to inform decision-making. If you recall from the very beginning, data science is solving organizational problems through the discovery of data insight and the development of data products. What that means is having the right people that can perform those analyses, as well as communicate those results, and having the technology to empower them. So technology can support maintaining and surfacing data. It can support collaboration. It can support automation. And the right combination of structure, of people and technology is highly organizational dependent. But I'm excited shortly to kick it off to Kate to share what worked for NRDC and what they tried. But similarly to assessing your data, there are a couple questions to consider when you might assess your people and your technology needs. Again, this is not exhaustive, but is intended to be a starting point for you to think about how to build data science capacity. You might ask yourself, what roles will support an initial investment? Will those roles have the right tools to communicate, to collaborate, and disseminate results as is? Will they have the necessary organizational context? Or are there additional tools that we might need to bring in to support them? How will we surface findings throughout the organization? How would we proceed when data or findings contradicts our intuition? Again, these questions are intended to serve as a starting point to get you thinking about what people and technology needs your organization might have. But to put a little bit more structure around it, I want to talk about different ways that you can structure a data science team. There are three main ways to structure a data science team. This is really a continuous spectrum here, but want to highlight these three as they often come up and are helpful ways to think about team structure. The first is a centralized team. A centralized team is kind of a standalone business unit that almost acts as internal consultants to other teams. On the complete other end of the spectrum, you have each team having its own dedicated data science function that is focusing on solving that particular team's needs and problems. And then in the middle, there's kind of a hybrid model, often called a hub and spoke model, where there's some centralized function, perhaps it's managing shared tools or preparing data sets, but analysts are also embedded in each team. There's no one right answer here, but factors that dictate what structure might be right for your organization include your organization's size, the needs of each function within your organization, potential commonalities of use cases across teams or data, the tools that you're using. What's really interesting about these structures is that often the pros of one are the cons of the other. But at this point, I'm going to actually pass it off to Kate because NRDC has a really interesting story with regards to data science teams.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'm going to tell you, oh, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of NRDC. And I can tell you that we've tried a lot of different things and nothing, as Ben said, is perfect. But I've definitely been in evolution. So we started from a very centralized team. And the reason for this was like a lot of transformation was happening at the same time. We were revamping our entire database infrastructure. We were bringing on lots of new tools. We were moving to Salesforce. We were starting to work in Van. And it was really a need to sort of like have a very centralized process around that. Some of the pros of that, it was like we had a very efficient system. It was really easy for executive support to kind of align on everything. But then some tough parts of that was just like, there was just a lot of bureaucracy and there was just lots of risks around failure because of competing department priorities. So we've definitely evolved this model into something a little bit different. And you can go to the next slide. In the decentralized teams, this is something that we haven't tried completely, is that, but there is a plus side to this. It's like because you have analysts sort of embedded in each team, it's really easy to prioritize the needs of specific teams. And the people that are working in those units really have a really in-depth knowledge about what is going to be impactful to that particular team that they're working with. It means that there's a really quick use of data and lots of agreement. The problem is that sometimes that creates even more silos because, well, for NRDC, we're really trying to move to a more integrated approach where we think about our audiences as going across channels. And when we've kind of steered away from decentralized teams because we want to orient our work to more of an audience or user-based journey. And then the next slide, and I can tell you a little bit about where we've ended up, which is more of a hub and spoke model. It really has helped us kind of create the best of both worlds. We have centralized analysis happening and centralized like change management. There's like, we're able to do that like sort of executive ownership, but it also makes sure that we have like data capacities embedded in teams as well. So there's lots of dotted lines between our management, but it also makes sure that we're actually able to centralize this like sort of system of analysis and the KPIs and goals that we're working against, but at the same time have those embedded analysts who can really be advocates for data within each of the teams. Head off to the next slide. You know, we don't have endless staff. And so there are decisions that we have to make about like what and when to outsource. And I think it's really important to note that this is really unique to your institution, your staffing, the way your budgets work and everything, but I can tell you what we do at NRDC. In-house, it's really worked well for us to really hold on to sort of all of the internal stakeholder management. We have an institutional data infrastructure that is managed by a team that's dedicated to the infrastructure. All of our business intelligence, data analysis, and strategy mostly happens in-house. Of course, there's times that we work collaboratively with Civis and other vendors to help us with this. But for the most part, we keep those sort of relationship management work internal. We do some outsourcing of data engineering and pipeline management, which I'll talk about a little bit. We work really collaboratively with Civis on survey design and modeling, and also get some support around data visualization. And the reason for that is like, we just don't have infinite capacity to sort of manage that. and really want to rely on the expertise of vendors like Civis and others to help us sort of do that in the best way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our data journey, which has been an exciting one. So I can tell you a little bit about where it started. So I've been at NRDC for about 6 years and was tasked with a major CRM conversion and sort of bringing data and analytics to the institution. It was a lot. And when I came in, we had separate CRMs. The membership and fundraising teams were using a tool. The online digital folks were using a tool. We were also onboarding tools like Van and mobile, and there really was this siloing happen. And so we had lots and lots and lots of different source systems. What happened was this led to lack of visibility. We knew intuitively, right? So the same person who was on our SMS list is also getting direct mail for us, but we couldn't actually pinpoint that. And so we were losing track of campaign performance. We were losing track about what type of communications people are actually getting. And we just didn't have reliable information. It was also really difficult to set KPIs and measure. And like I said before, we're moving to a model where we wanted to have joint KPIs and joint goal setting for the institution. So you can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, thanks. And so we really realized that we really needed technology to help us. And so our model is that we let technology do the heavy lifting so that we can focus our time on the things around the change management, the analysis, the strategy setting. And so we use technology to do the data ingest. We have built a scalable identity resolution pipeline, which Ben talked about, to help us understand user behavior. And we use technology to build workflows and do tasks that it used to be that, you were uploading your CSVs to different source systems. And we really rely on automation to help us both prevent human error and save time to make sure that we as internal staff members have the time to use the data in our work. And then we've also developed a sort of one-stop shop for analytics so that people aren't going to multiple locations to find information. They know where to go and where to find the information they need to make strategic decisions. And then the last thing is that our technology also lets us create sort of a dashboarding system, which basically democratizes data access. So people can see and at any time kind of see what's happening with campaigns or work that they're doing. So where we've evolved to, and just some examples of this is that, so we also use identity resolution with Civis. We currently have about 5 or 6 source systems that are ingested through identity resolution. That includes our advocacy and fundraising tools, SMS, Van, Salesforce for our donor advocacy, and all of that data is piped into our IDR system. We find out who the user is, we match them, develop the golden rules about what is the best contact, where to get that information from, and then we append Civis data on top of that, which helps us to check our assumptions about who our base is. So we can track things like demographics, the psychographic qualities of our supporters. If we're collecting survey data, we can then bring that back and tie it to our users so we understand what is motivating them, both from a quantitative perspective, but also being able to add on the layer of qualitative analysis that is so important with understanding users' motivations. And then the last thing that we've moved to is being able to then use this information to do targeted outreach. And so we've built some tools with Civis to also be able to understand our audiences and then use that for targeting, whether that's through advertising or email marketing or anything else. It really lets us understand that and create a user journey across all of our different platforms. You can head to the next slide. Not only does it sort of help us with audience understanding, but it's also helping us to sort of drive campaign investments. So an example of this, I'm going to put my C4 hat on for a second, is that like a lot of organizations, we did some GeoTV efforts this last cycle. We really wanted to make sure that what we were doing was additive and not something that wasn't going to be helpful to our supporters and to the broader movement. So we did a lot of analysis on who our audiences are and what was motivating them, and also who we wanted to motivate to vote. So for all intents and purposes, we wanted to turn out climate voters. By understanding the sort of what content our users were engaging with, where the platforms they were, how they wanted to, what the most important part of voting was this cycle, which was, about voting safely. It became pretty clear to us that we wanted to invest our campaign strategy into ensuring that we were giving information about safe voting and safe resources, which led us to invest in partnering with organizations like vote.org and other places to make sure that we were able to provide those resources. What that did was it tailored the spend so in the right places so that we were able to really track how we were both spending our money, but also seeing a return on an investment for the audiences we're trying to activate. Head to the next one, sorry. And then Ben touched on this as well, but we have just started to sort of dip our toes into sort of segmentation and modeling. And we've done a couple modeling projects over the years, but one that's been really impactful, and I think a growth point also, is that we've developed a model to target likely sustainers. We had a huge influx of sustaining donors after the election, like a lot of organizations. And we were really looking at ways to sort of keep building on that and surface other potential sustaining donors from our supporter file. There was definitely, I think because it was sort of new to NRDC, there was some resistance to actually kind of changing the way that we try to target people. But what's been interesting is we did a lot of analysis on the back end. We looked and evaluated the model score, and some really interesting things started, which sort of exploded our assumptions about who the best sustainers were. There's this magic number that we have, which is, Ben knows it better than I, but it's like 0.494645. People with that score have a really high propensity to become a sustaining donor. And it's really opened up this opportunity for us to start experimenting and sort of test our assumptions about what we thought made a really good sustainer. There's definitely some growing pains there. It's like, how do you change the way in the machine that you have around how you're doing segmentation and targeting of people? And it's, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's a really important factor when you're looking at bringing in data science. Is like, you can bring things and insights up into the surface, but part of that is also about how you're managing change management. So you can head to the next slide. So the last section is about this, sort of like how you support organizational transformation. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, almost as much work as basically doing all of the CRM migrations. But this is a graph that kind of shows the as we've talked, there's this equation between data, people, and software. But there's also a huge part of it that's about culture. And so you can spend a ton of your time kind of in this place around, you're doing all this fantastic data work, but it's not actually driving decision-making. And I think there's a balancing act that happens. And so what you want to try to move towards is having the technology to support that, so that you can then be in a place where you're using the analysis to do change management. And so this is definitely a squiggly line. I feel like my life is a squiggly line of like, you're at the high points and the low points. But what you want to basically err towards is that you're in that upper quadrant where you're feeling like the technology is doing the right thing and your analysts are equipped with the information that's able to sort of experiment and drive decision-making within your organization. So part of that, and this is huge, is building data literacy. For NRDC, and I think for a lot of organizations, it's like you can say you want to do data science, but I think a lot of it is about how you're making your stakeholders understand the data and how you can use data for driving change management. So we've built a system of, and this is just one example of dashboards that kind of help do that. So they connect the dots between things like, so a lot of times if you're just looking in Google Analytics, it's like, oh, this page is doing really well. But what we've able to sort of layer on top of that is like, okay, this page is performing really well, but with who and why, and how is that tied to sort of what we're seeing around conversions and engagement on our content. And so a lot of the work is then making sure that people understand what the data is telling you and what makes up the components of the data. So you're all working from a common language. And so that's been a huge part of our journey as well. You can head to the next slide. So a little bit about how to make the business case. Because obviously we all come from lots of different types of organizations with differing budget and staff capacities. And this is actually like, you know, a large portion of my life was spent in how to make the business case and to convince the organization that this is a spend that's worth doing. And I would say there's as much data analysis in this as there is in doing the data analysis itself. So I started from a place of really doing a deep dive on where we were spending money on technology. And, you know, I think what it surfaced was like a lot of analysis was happening in silos, and it was disparate and disconnected, and we were spending a ton of resources on it. And so what that helped us identify was that there were places where we could streamline those budget spends and make sure that we are creating more of a centralized and connected analytics service. We were lucky because the organization was also going through a strategic planning process. And so the investment in our technology was also geared to some strategic goals that we wanted to have as an institution around building increased reach, increasing conversions, etc. And so I can't overestimate how important it is to tie that to your goals, because I think it both grounds the analysis and the work that you're doing, but also creates a framework to make clear that this is a really important investment to make in order to meet those goals. So we started very early on with Civis with just a really simple project of understanding our email and mobile list. We had them do a list append. And from there, that really helped us to sort of then move into the next steps and understand what kind of scope we needed to move into and the needs that we're going to have to meet our goals. The second is ROI. So I've spent a lot of time in budget meetings talking about like, well, can you tell me how much this technology is going to save us in the long run? And I think that's it's part of the data literacy conversation, because obviously there's an initial investment and it actually takes time to see the return on investment. But I think going back to the budget analysis and the staff time and capacities that are being spent on disparate technology actually makes a really great success case for how you can sort of optimize and make sure that you're getting a return on investment with the use of new tools and an investment in data science. A big one for me is also data governance and security. When you have siloed data systems and data tools, it's scary. You know, there isn't a lot of there just isn't a lot of visibility into how people are creating data. And so I work from a place of like really want people to have access to data but we also want to reduce the risks of like PII being mishandled or anything like that. And so I think that's a really great selling point also for making the case to the sort of executive team about how to invest in data technology. And then lastly, I feel like the last two go hand in hand. It's really about democratizing data. We all will perform better if everybody has access to the same information, and that you can be making joint decisions about best how to reach audiences and to meet your goals as an institution. And so it's just a really important thing to integrate into any planning that you're doing, and making sure that that's really a case that you're making, is that this is all about us being better informed in the work that we're doing. So if you go to the next slide, and just to drill down on the data literacy point, is that our journey really started from this place of joint goal setting. So we actually went through a process of setting joint goals, and we created that common lexicon that we could use to understand what kind of metrics that we are performing against. This let us both get the like executive level buy-in of like, okay, here are the goals that we're all executing as, and then it made a platform for us to be able to celebrate our successes, learn from the things that we weren't doing as well, and that, and also like just create different ways for people to sort of access data. And then this last bullet is really important. Everybody learns differently. And so one of the parts of data literacy is also making sure that you're not building data tools in a vacuum, and getting iterative feedback back from your stakeholders, and making sure that they are understanding what you're presenting and how to use the data. And the graph on here is just an example of some of the strategic work that we've been doing to sort of orient our work towards how we're tracking against some of our internal goals. All right. So lessons learned. Iteration and experimentation, that like is across the board. Like I said, we started in one place with a structure and moved to lots of different places. And that's true with data as well. And I think you're always under the pressure of delivering something. But I think one of the things that I hope is that organizations can appreciate that experimentation is really important. And you might have to start someplace and end up in a really different direction. So I try, and I hope most organizations can kind of have that culture within their organizations when thinking about data science. Second, start with clear and self-contained research questions. This will make it so much easier to not bite off too much at the same time. And I've definitely fallen into the trap of like, I want to do everything. But it's really, really important that you start small and kind of iterate from there and build on very simple things to get to a larger strategic change. Third, building data literacy and change management have to happen hand in hand. And don't discount how much time it takes. People get really excited when they see the first flashy dashboard or information that's out there in the world. But that doesn't mean that the change management happens at the same time. And so it's the use of the data and how that informs strategy, which is really important also to happen while you're building data literacy within your organization. And lastly, I think everybody knows this, it's like it requires leadership buy-in. Because for us, we were really reorienting to sort of this goal. And I could put the goals and how we were performing against those goals in a dashboard over and over again, but there still requires that executive buy-in to both support the analysis, but also make sure that strategic shifts happen in response to what you're seeing in the data. So that is, I think, the end of our presentation, but we'd love to take questions. I've been trying to read the comments, but we'd love to take questions and from you all. All right. Ben, do you see questions that we can?
Yes, and I think, Kate, I'm scrolling up from the bottom. I
Okay.
see a question that I think would be great to have your thoughts on from Joe. I attended a great session yesterday talking about digital teams. The slide about digital team structure was almost identical to your slide on data team structure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on data versus digital versus product and when it is helpful for orgs to think about and structure staff around one concept or another. I think, Kate, you had some interesting experiences with digital at one point too.
Yeah, Joe, that's a good one. Yeah, I do not have the magic solution to this because I really think it depends on the scale and size of your organizations and the needs. I will be honest, I've tried a little bit of everything. We used to have digital and data in one place. I think, and we definitely operate from a sort of a product development framework. I have found that in our institution, there's a bit of a I don't know how to a resistance to that sort of work. So we've kind of moved into more of a hybrid model just because it works best for our organization. And I will say that we have spent time. I used to manage all of the infrastructure in addition to sort of the digital side, and it was a lot. And I think, and oftentimes it takes a lot to sort of manage that infrastructure is its own specialty. And I think is a hard for a team to manage in one place. Let's look back here.
I'm also seeing a handful of questions about how to do this in a smaller organization or how to do this with a smaller team, and acknowledgements that as I was talking about some of those different roles in a lot of organizations, all of those functions sit with one person. And that's certainly a reality in a lot of organizations. I'm happy to share my thoughts on this. And then Kate, if there's anything else that you want to add, definitely chime in. I think particularly with a smaller organization, the element that Kate was just talking about of starting with a clear self-contained research question or objective and making sure that it's tied to a decision and that it's actionable is kind of a really important thing to have front and center. For a smaller organization with, say, kind of one data person, it might be a data scientist, it might be a data engineer, it might even just be someone who's data inclined. Not necessarily going to be making huge investments in technology or growing that team, but that doesn't mean that you can't highlight kind of key questions about the business and figure out, okay, what data do we have? And of those questions that we have about our organization, what is our data currently able to answer? And let's tackle that. And building that shared understanding around, okay, this is an initiative to answer this one question, and then building from there. Actually had an interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with a pretty small organization that essentially said, we don't know what we don't know about our list. And so that can be a starting point of, we don't need to put into place crazy amounts of automation, crazy data pipelines. Let's just try to provide a few inputs that can then be incorporated into your strategic planning to answer that question of, we don't know what we don't know and how our list is engaging. So I don't know if that's the most helpful answer in that regard, but I think for a smaller team, it's just being really honest about what are the skills that we have, what are the data we have, what are the questions we have about our organization, and then prioritizing from there, what can we actually tackle? And let's tackle that and build momentum from there.
The only thing I'd add is there's a lot of great support for smaller organizations to get even if you don't have in-house capacities. So there's Ben, is it the movement cooperative, but there are lots of, I can send it around later, but like, I think there's lots of other great places where you could look to sort of community support when you might not have the resources that you need internally to start. Oh, I see a question from Devin. I'm happy to answer. How quickly did the team grow, and what number of people are on the data team when you joined? Kind of zero. I mean, we didn't have a data team, so it's definitely been an evolution. And I think we're up to probably 15 folks that are working in data functions. There's probably more than that across the organization, but sort of central to sort of the work that I'm doing.
See another question from Susan about any data literacy training tips or resources. I think certainly there are organizations out there that their whole purpose is data literacy training, but from what I've seen, I think something that can be really helpful is identifying projects that the broader organization can tackle that are both kind of data learning type projects, but intimately tied into strategic outcomes. And so that way people are learning, but also seeing the impact of those projects as they tackle them. Another thing that I found works well just in organizations that I've worked in is potentially setting up something like a data meetup that could be open to the entire organization, where you could even be as simple as doing a round robin of what generally data adjacent work you've been doing or interested in. And then maybe once a month, everyone gives or one person gives a presentation on what they've been working on. And that's a really kind of informal way of encouraging conversations around data. But Kate, you've been doing this work at NRDC. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think I've been doing a lot of like data 101 sessions with folks, and I've kind of built like a curriculum around that internally, and it's a mixture of data curriculums, and then the same thing that Ben talked about, the sort of meetup structure. I'm happy to send some links and resources afterwards too.
All right. Kate, there's a question for you that just came in about how long did it take to go from you to 15? Were there big wins that helped move that forward?
Oh, so it was probably 3 to 4 years, 3 years. Time is funny. And I mean, I was in a very unique situation where we were doing that sort of, a lot was happening at once. And so the big wins was like, I mean, honestly, like just our simple dashboard that we worked on with Civis early on, just to understand who our supporter base was huge, because that kind of set in motion a lot of the other work that we needed to do to sort of like reorient how we were doing data analysis and just strategy in general. And then other big wins is, I mean, recently we've just had a huge win, is that like, is really, we're actually using a lot of, because we have IDR, we've started to do really advanced segmentation management, which I think is both helping us be more targeted in how we do outreach and all of that. And so that's been a huge shift for us. And so those are the two things that like stick out to me as like big wins. Oh, yes. Rachel, yes. It wasn't just me. I shouldn't take, but yeah.
All right, well, I know we're just about at time here, and I think we're going to get shut down in just a minute. So thank you all for joining, for the engaging questions. Apologies if we didn't get to any questions. Certainly feel free to reach out and we can answer those questions offline.
Thanks a lot, and really happy to answer questions. So let me know. Let us know.